absolutely love the Vivo X300 Pro, as you've seen, and it is so close to perfect. It's just slightly lacking in the battery department to be called winner, which means overall smartphone of the year is going to its very similar cousin that isn't, the Oppo Find X9 Pro. I think this is the closest we've ever been to a flawless phone. The only flaw being that you might struggle to get one, depending on where you live. They even pre-installed the screen protector. Just...
Eastfork started as just a little pottery, and today we've got a factory, about 115 employees, no more than that now. Shopify gives people the agency to do something, like starting a business, selling stuff online. Shopify makes it easy, that makes it fun.
Join Google Fi Wireless and get Pixel 10a on us. Sign up for unlimited premium, our most popular plan, and get maximum perks like hotspot tethering and high-speed data in over 200 international destinations. That's more than any other major U.S. carrier. Plus, save $10 a month on your bill for 2 years. Make the switch and see how Pixel 10a is better with Google Fi Wireless.
I have just bought arguably the best cheap phone, the best mid-range phone, and the best flagship phone, so that we can find out how much difference there actually is in 2025. Because on paper, this makes zero sense. The $1,300 flagship Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra has a 200 megapixel camera, but so does the $300 Redmi Note 14 Pro Plus. The Samsung has a premium metal and glass body, but so does this. The flagship has a large 5,000 mAh battery, but then actually the budget phone gets an extra 110 mAh on top of that. And you might say, oh, well, the difference now is AI. Flagship phones have AI, cheaper phones do not. But guess what? In 2025, even that is not the case. Both our $300 budget Redmi phone and our $500 mid-ranger, the new Samsung Galaxy A56, are stuffed with AI features. So here's how we're going to get to the bottom of this. We've got 8 categories, and in each one, we're going to see how well the budget, the mid-range, and the flagship phones score out of 10. To find out, ultimately, how much extra are you really getting for like 4.5 times the price with a flagship phone these days? So let's start with what the phone's come with. Our budget phone has the phone on top, with, importantly, a pre-installed screen protector, which can actually save you a lot of pain in the future. We've got a silicone case, which feels surprisingly not budget with this textured inside, and then a somewhat dated but still functional USB-A to C cable. So no charger, but aside from that, a pretty complete experience. I'd give it 7 points. As for the mid-ranger, so this does vary from phone to phone, but as a general trend, you will often strangely see more expensive phones like this come with less stuff. Like here, there is no pre-installed screen protector, there is no case. It's literally USB-C to C cable and the phone. So if our budget device got 7 points, then I'd give this a 4. And likewise with our flagship phone, the Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra. We've got the phone itself. And then, again, USB-C to C cable, which makes sense. If you're buying more expensive phones, you're more likely to also have a modern laptop that has USB-C ports instead of the older USB-A. But that aside, this is again a pretty scant unboxing experience. 4 points here too. So far, budget is in the lead. But what about build quality? Because 5 years ago, there used to be a pretty clear distinction. Premium phones were glass and metal, cheap phones were creaky plastic. But that is becoming less and less true now. Partly because every company wants to step away as a brand from just the impression of being a cheap company, but also partly because the cost to make the reinforced glass that actually goes onto a phone has come way down. I mean, there's no doubt that flagship phones still have the best materials. Like, these two have aluminium frames around them. The S25 Ultra has titanium, which is quite a bit stronger. These two have a slightly older type of glass on their screens, whereas the flagship phone uses the very latest glass available, Gorilla Glass Armor 2. But there are 2 important caveats.
If I already knew that, why would I have to dial it through you?
The difference now between flagship and cheap, between titanium and aluminium, and between the Armor 2 glass on the flagship and the Victus 2 glass on the cheapest phone is, for an average user, not a very big one. I mean, you'll only notice it if you drop your phone. And there's a cushion right here, and you completely missed it. But then even if you do drop your phone, there's a pretty decent chance that the extra layer that you get on your screen thanks to this pre-installed screen protector will actually make just as much, if not more difference than any improvements to the glass itself on this phone. And B, the other interesting thing is that the budget phone is technically better built than the mid-ranger. Because while the front glass on our Redmi is built using tech from 2023, the front glass on the Samsung A56 is actually using tech from 2022, which is a little bit more susceptible to cracking. And also, while our budget Redmi phone has an IP68 rating, our mid-ranger only has an IP67, which means that even though the thing is $200 more expensive, it's actually less likely to be able to withstand water immersion. And of course, while this inverted hierarchy doesn't apply to every single budget and mid-range phone, this is also not a one-off. Like this, for example, is the Xiaomi 14T. Again, mid-ranger. It's way more expensive than our cheap Redmi, but it's got a plastic frame instead of aluminium, and it's got Gorilla Glass 5 on the front, which was introduced all the way back in, I kid you not, 2016. My theory is that while budget phones have to be designed to be very competitive and have a very current feature set, since price-conscious consumers are absolutely going to check all the mid-ranges notes, the way the companies think about their mid-ranges is different. Oftentimes, mid-ranges feel like companies where you're
Hi, I would agree.
And flagship can take a pretty easy night. It's better in terms, but also executed in a more tasteful, premium way. So 13 months to
Great.
now is where it goes from strange to just bizarre. Because the way you would expect this video to go based on pricing is pretty
Yeah.
simple. You would think in every category, if the flagship scores a 9, then the mid-range would be about 5 or 6, and then the budget would be about 3. But that's just not how it works anymore. Like with displays,
Just like Grape.
the flagship does have the best. It's bigger, it's got really tiny, really even borders for a futuristic aesthetic, which neither of the other two phones have been able to pull off, since getting those even borders requires some re-engineering on the inside, all with this absolutely sick
I would agree.
anti-reflective coating that makes the thing clearly visible in all lighting conditions. While the other two phones are still prone to blur from light sources. And again, budget versus mid-range battery goes the opposite way to what you would expect. This Redmi phone has a higher resolution for an A56, and while I definitely say Samsung
Did that work
still
out?
has enough pixels for almost everyone, it's still 1080p. Redmi has 30% more pixels within the same area. It's brighter. Redmi claims to peak at 3,000 nits compared to Samsung's 1,900. And while I wouldn't say the difference feels that massive,
No, I just want a Grape.
still tell. On top of that, it's got its own Red Touch technology, meaning that you can still use the Redmi just after washing your hands or in the shower. Whereas in those situations, Samsung's display goes absolutely haywire. So budget phone gets 8 for display, mid-range gets 6, and flagship gets a 10 in this case. Because this S25 Ultra
Okay.
actually is as good as
Well,
it gets on the
thanks
market.
for listening to me, Grape.
Software is not as easy to rate. It's a little bit less of a clear category as in the display materials. If you look closer, you will still find trends that do separate these three tiers of phone. So the first is that, generally speaking, the cheaper the phone, the more its software is going to learn. And this is partly components, slower chips, slower memory, but it's actually mostly down to optimization. Think about it. Companies can justify spending 6 months optimizing their most premium device of the year that customers are paying $1,300 for, and that all the media are paying attention to. They can't justify anything close to that level of support for one of the 10 budget $300 phones that they might quietly slip out every couple of months. And so, generally speaking, you can expect a budget phone in 2025 to feel fast enough, but it will lag when it's overwhelmed, and it doesn't take a whole lot to
No,
overwhelm.
just great.
Simple things like opening up the camera and processing the photos that come from that camera. There are clear delays in these processes. The mid-range phone experience tends to be a lot smoother.
No, just great.
It feels 95 to 98% flawless, with enough work put into the software that these phones don't completely freak out when you try and flip between the three different things. And the flagship is like the cream on the speed cake.
Yes.
That 5% of extra zippiness that no one needs, but everyone wants, where you wait for basically nothing. The second difference between these tiers is updates. While this flagship S25 Ultra gets 7 years of full upgrades, the mid-range Samsung gets 6 years. And to be honest, that is on the higher end.
Yes, great.
The average mid-range will be closer to 4 or 5 years. Now, the budget end, you'll get 3 years if you're lucky. Plus, you get to those updates slower on the lower end phones. That makes sense. Reducing software support is literally the easiest way for companies to save millions without harming that key spec sheet that price-conscious consumers are paying most attention to. Besides, cheaper phones have the weaker hardware, right? So it's going to take a company even more
Discreet me there.
to continually keep optimizing it, to keep adding new features, and then making sure those features run very well.
Great.
The third thing is ads. The cheaper the phone, generally the more bloatware
Just great.
the more likely you are to get spammed by crappy notifications and have recommended apps that the phone encourages you to download. And this Redmi is a prime
What?
Trying to know people and that's you still get some request of a mid-range Samsung, but then actually the vast majority of that spam just disappears when you get to the phone. And I don't like all of this ad stuff, but I also wouldn't want to overweight it, since if it ever bothers you enough, you can almost always just disable it with 10 minutes of team. But overall, man, pretty clear that software is one of those areas where you do get what you pay for. They're all actually, they all can do pretty much the same thing, but there is a noticeable difference in the quality of
Great. Huh. What the fuck? Oh, I want to see that.
There is another layer to the software these days. We hear so much about the AI features of flagship phones. I've been so curious how much of that trickles down into the more affordable devices. Well, the best way to think about it is the cheaper the phone, the less likely you are to get the features that would take more effort to implement. But doesn't mean you get nothing. Because as a very base layer, even the cheapest Android phones now have access to Google's AI features. So you still get things like Circle to Search, this way to instantly look up anything on your screen, or now even be able to identify music within a video that's playing. You're still getting the smartest version of the Google Assistant called Gemini. You can ask it way more complex things without needing to word it as if you're specifically Googling for something. You just talk. With also the ability to jump into a live chat with Gemini, which I find really useful as a balancing point. The only difference here really is that with a higher end phone, you might get deeper integration. So for example, with our mid-range and high-ender, the Gemini Assistant can save a note to my Samsung Notes app, which has required extra work on Samsung's end to make it possible. Whereas here, you will just get the basic Gemini experience, which connects to Google Apps, but nothing else. But you're probably getting the idea here. In terms of what AI things you can actually do in these 3 tiers of phone, there's not actually a huge gap at all. You know, all of these writing tools, for example, how the flagship Samsung can summarize large bodies of text, how it can auto-format things. Even our cheapest phone has equivalents to basically all of them. They don't work quite as fast as the ones on the Samsung, but they do work. You still get things like the ability to AI summarize voice notes on our budget phone. You still get real-time translation features. Admittedly, I don't think Redmi's integration is nearly as slick as Samsung's, but that's more on the brand than it is the price point. Or photo editing tools. Our basic phone still has full-on generative AI image expansion, and it works really well. As far as I can see, it works just as well as that of high-end phones, all finished off with Object Eraser. And as impressive as the one on Samsung's is, Redmi is very much in the same league with its ability to remove people and distractions from shots with zero trace of the maxed out. So much so that you specifically need to run an extreme version of that test to even get a number for that phone. And when you do, it will literally come out 5 to 6 times better than the other two phones. Now, if you pay more and get an upper mid-range device, then you will find its performance closer to the flagship. But for the vast majority of phones at this $500 price, you're very likely to get shafted with the low-end performance. So I think score-wise, it's only fair to go 4 points to budget, 5 points to mid-range, and then 9 points to flagship. So it's at this point that mid-range is starting to catch up, and flagship is starting to very much cement its lead. Okay, let's talk cameras, because I would actually say this is the category with the largest amount of disinformation out there. There's like 1,000 ways that companies in the past have tried to make their cameras seem better than they are. You'll get some with absolutely massive camera rings, but then you realise that's all they are. The actual lenses will be these tiny things in the middle. It's like those bugs with the giant eye patterns to scare off predators. You get cameras with absolutely obscene resolution numbers, but then you find that the sensors within those cameras aren't nearly big enough to take advantage of those resolutions. The list goes on, and I would say this was a very real problem with budget phones 5+ years ago. Everyone talked the talk. They tried to make it seem like they had a great camera, and none of them could walk the walk. But this has actually changed quite a bit. The 200 megapixel main camera on this $300 Redmi phone is absolutely phenomenal. Take the same photo on this phone versus even the highest end flagship phone to exist, and it's genuinely a toss-up. I would actually say that 80% of the time I prefer the Redmi shots to the photos taken on the Samsung A56, and 50% of the time I would even say I prefer it to the kingpin flagship phone. And that's because this isn't just a 200 megapixel camera for the sake of slapping a big number onto it. This 200 megapixel camera has a large sensor. It has a lighting. It even has optical image stabilization baked in, so you get smooth video and less handshaking. Now that said, obviously you can't have everything. While budget phones in 2025 do generally tend to have strong main cameras like this phone, very often better than the main cameras on more expensive mid-range phones, there are 3 areas where you will still find the cameras lacking. The first is the fluidity. Everything you do on these budget phone cameras feels a little sluggish. Even if the end result is exceptional, you have to trudge through a little to get there. B is the secondary cameras. Have a look at this. 200 megapixel main camera, 8 megapixel ultra-wide, 2 megapixel macro camera. There is a steep fall-off when you move away from the main camera, to the point where you would only use this ultra-wide and macro when you absolutely have to. With the mid-ranger, there's still a fall-off. We have a 50 megapixel main camera, 12 megapixel ultra-wide, and 5 megapixel macro, which means still enough of a difference that you feel like you should try to use the main camera when you can, but at least here it's not embarrassing when you have to shoot with the ultra-wide. And then for the flagship, we're talking 200 megapixel, and then 10, 50, 50. At this price, companies are less obsessed with trying to make one part of the experience exceptional and more focused on trying to eliminate all of the weak points to create an experience where you can happily use any camera on this phone interchangeably and you can have an exceptional image either way. Not to mention long-range zoom. Like if we try slowly zooming in using all 3 of these phones, it's pretty apparent just how quickly the budget and the mid-range fall apart compared to the flagship. You pretty much never get a good zoom camera on affordable phones, and you pretty much always get a great zoom camera on expensive phones. And the final thing is, more expensive phones have more powerful image processing. And this doesn't really matter when you're just taking a standard photo, as we've seen, since budget phones have now caught up and can do that fine. But what you start to notice is when you try to do things that require more intelligence, like video. The processing on top-end phones is able to bring out more sharpness and more detail, even though the main camera sensors are quite similar. So overall cameras then, I'm very impressed with the main camera of this budget phone, but you can absolutely tell that it's still not an overall flagship experience. 6 points. The mid-ranger is a little underwhelming in all regards. It's not really exceptional at anything, but reliable, smooth, and intelligent enough to give you good quality video and portrait mode. 7 points. And that flagship is still quite way out. 9 points. And then, just before we bring this all together, battery. In terms of capacity, our basic phone has 5,110 mAh, and then both mid-range and flagship 5,000. So it's all very much in the same ballpark. But in practice, you'll find that the S25 Ultra is the one that lasts the longest with average use, even though it's the one with the most powerful chipset. Then it's the mid-range phone, and then it's the budget with the least powerful chip. Why? Well, firstly, the chips that you get in more expensive phones phones, they are pretty much always based on newer, more efficient tech. And so while if you are pushing them to their max, they can consume more power, when they're not being pushed, they can also coast along using less. Second, expensive phones often have other traits that can also aid battery life. Like, for example, more efficient display materials that can create the same image using less juice. And the ability to scale down their refresh rate super low when you don't need it to be high. And then finally it comes down to that same old chestnut, optimization. If a company just takes the basic Android that Google makes, slaps it on their phone and ships it, it's going to be a very sloppy experience on all fronts. And so it really matters how much care the company puts into tuning that software around the specific hardware that they've picked for that phone. And this tends to worsen the cheaper you go. So to give you an idea, normal use on the Redmi Note 14 would get me to the end of the day with about 15% battery left. I'd have 20 on the mid-ranger and then over 30 on the flagship. Somewhat countered by the extremely fast charging that, funnily enough, seems to be limited to more affordable Chinese-made phones. This can charge with 120 watts of power compared to 45 on the other two. But me personally, I'd rather just not run out in the first place. So I don't think the budget phone and the mid-ranger is 7. The flagship gets 8. Brilliant.